On a freezing winter night in the mountains, a former Marine sat alone with only his loyal German shepherd by his side, until a frantic knock shattered the silence and changed everything. When he opened the door, two trembling children, lost, starving, and desperate, stood in the snow with nowhere left to go. What happened next turned an empty cabin into a miracle none of them ever expected. Before we begin, I'd love to know, where are you watching from today? Thank you so much for being here. And if this story touches your heart, please subscribe and help us share more healing stories like this. Winter in the mountains of northwestern Montana had a reputation for being unforgiving, and that night proved it true. The wind roared through the tall pines like a restless beast, shaking loose flurries of snow that spiraled across the dark sky. The nearest town was nearly 20 miles away, leaving the vast forest wrapped in a silence so complete it felt like its own world. Ethan lived alone in a small wooden cabin tucked between two ridges, a place he had chosen for its isolation after leaving the Marines. He was a man of 45, tall and broad-shouldered, with a strong build forged from years of field work. His face carried the weathered, rugged lines of someone who had spent more time outdoors than indoors. Faint creases at the edges of his deep-set blue eyes revealed the memories of battles fought, losses carried, and a determination that had never left him. His short, dark brown hair carried strands of gray at the temples, and a neatly trimmed beard framed his jaw, evidence of his preference for discipline even after military life. Despite his stern appearance, there was kindness behind his eyes, the sort of restrained warmth that rarely showed, but never disappeared. Inside the cabin, the fire crackled warmly in the stone hearth, filling the room with amber light. A pot of stew simmered on the table, steam rising in soft curls. Sitting at Ethan's feet was Ranger, his loyal German shepherd, now 6 years old. Ranger had a thick double coat of black and tan fur, intelligent amber eyes, and a posture that mixed disciplined alertness with the quiet loyalty of a dog who understood more than he could express. Ethan had adopted him as a young pup during a volunteer rescue mission after a severe storm in Wyoming. Ranger had survived alone beside the ruins of a collapsed barn, and that early brush with loss had made him especially protective and perceptive. The two had been inseparable ever since. Ranger lay calmly, enjoying the warmth, but the stiffness in his ears showed he was always listening, always ready. Ethan lifted a spoon of stew when Ranger suddenly rose to his feet. His ears shot up, his body tensed, and a low rumble formed in his chest. Ethan froze. Ranger never reacted like that without reason. The wind howled again outside, but this time Ethan heard something faint beneath it. Quick, frantic tapping. Before he could stand, the tapping turned into forceful knocking, sharp and desperate, slamming repeatedly against the wooden door. Ethan set the bowl aside and moved toward the entrance with controlled steps, born from years of training. Ranger walked beside him, muscles tight, ready for anything. When Ethan unlatched the door and pulled it open, a gust of icy wind blasted into the cabin, followed by a small figure stumbling into view. Standing on the porch was a boy of around 10 years old, shivering violently. He wore a thin yellow jacket that was torn at the sleeves, jeans smeared with frost and dirt, and shoes barely holding together. His dark hair was matted from snow, and his cheeks were flushed bright red from the cold. His brown eyes were wide with fear, glimmering with tears that froze before they could fall. The boy looked severely underfed. His limbs were thin, his shoulders narrow, and he clutched his arms around his body as if trying to hold himself together. Ranger tilted his head. his tail giving a gentle sway, a silent gesture that said the boy wasn't a threat. The boy, seeing the large German shepherd, stiffened for a second, but the calmness in Ranger's gaze seemed to reassure him enough for his trembling lips to move. My sister," he gasped, his breath breaking into fragmented clouds in the cold air. "My sister, she fell. She can't stand up. I don't know what to do. Please, please help us." His voice cracked on the last word. Ethan felt something shift inside him. Not just concern, but something older and deeper. The instinct he thought he had left behind with the Marines. The reflex to protect the vulnerable. He placed a steady hand on the boy's shoulder. "Take a breath," he said, his voice low but firm. "Where is she?" The boy shook, partly from cold and partly from fear. "Back there, near the trail, near the big pine. I tried to carry her, but I couldn't." Ethan didn't hesitate. He grabbed his heavy coat from the hook beside the door, shrugging into it with practiced movements. Ranger was already halfway out the door, his paws crunching into the snow as if he had understood everything. Ethan looked back at the boy. "Stay close. Ranger will lead the way." The boy nodded, wiping his face with the back of his sleeve. Though frightened, there was a flicker of hope in his expression now that someone had listened. The three of them set off into the storm. The wind bit at their faces, slicing through the trees with a cruel chill. Snow coated the ground in uneven layers, hiding rocks and branches beneath its surface. Ethan kept the boy beside him, steadying him when he slipped. Ranger stayed ahead, nose to the ground, moving with purpose. His sharp senses made him an excellent tracker. He stopped occasionally, sniffing, then continued in a slightly adjusted direction. Ethan recognized the signs. Ranger was following a scent trail. After several minutes, Ranger splayed his paws, lowered his head, and gave a short, decisive bark. Ethan hurried forward. There, slumped against the trunk of a large pine tree dusted with snow, was a little girl, no older than 7. She wore a thin green shirt and a small jacket far too light for winter. Her clothing was torn, her knees scraped, and her small hands were red from the cold. Her long brown hair was tangled, and her eyes fluttered weakly as she tried to stay conscious. The boy rushed to her side. "Emily, I brought help. I brought help. I promise." Ethan crouched beside the girl, his gaze sharp but gentle. He immediately noticed her right ankle angled slightly outward, an obvious sign of a minor dislocation. Her breathing was rapid but strong. Ranger lay beside her, pressing his warm body lightly against her side as if offering heat and comfort. "She's going to be all right," Ethan said, his voice steady. "It's a small injury. I'm going to help her." The little girl whimpered when Ethan touched her ankle. Ranger licked her hand softly, calming her. Ethan worked with careful precision, using knowledge from countless field emergencies. With a controlled motion, he guided the bone gently back into place. The girl gasped, then clung to her brother, but the pain began to ease. Ethan lifted her into his arms, her head resting against his chest. She was light, too light for a child her age. "Let's get her warm," he said. Ranger trotted ahead, turning back every few steps to check that Ethan and the children were following. They walked through the storm toward the warm glow of Ethan's cabin, the wind swirling around them like a reminder of the danger they had escaped. But for the first time that night, there was a fragile sense of safety. Ethan steady and strong, Ranger guiding them home, and 2 children who had finally found someone willing to open the door. Snow continued to fall in thick, swirling sheets as Ethan carried the little girl through the forest. The weight of her small body barely noticeable compared to the urgency of the moment. The world was muted by the storm, every sound swallowed by the wind except for the crunching of boots and the steady padding of Ranger's paws. Ranger stayed several steps ahead, his black and tan coat dusted with snow, his nose constantly testing the air. Even after finding the girl, he remained sharply alert, acting as both guide and guardian, glancing back every few moments to ensure Ethan and the children were still close behind. His loyalty and discipline, molded from years at Ethan's side, showed in every movement. The boy walked beside Ethan, still trembling from the cold, though the fear in his eyes had softened now that help had arrived. Up close, Ethan could see more about the boy. He had a narrow face, slightly angular, with a small scar above his eyebrow that looked old but hinted at past hardships. His dark hair was cut unevenly, as though done by someone without proper tools, and his thin frame revealed months of malnutrition. The boy's demeanor had a strange mix of caution and bravery. Despite his exhaustion, he kept glancing at his sister with a protectiveness that felt far beyond his years. "Is she going to be okay?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "Yes," Ethan said. "Her ankle was dislocated, but it wasn't bad. She just needs warmth and rest." Ranger made a soft, reassuring whine, as if confirming Ethan's words. The trees began to thin, and through the storm, Ethan spotted the warm orange glow from his cabin windows. Ranger shook the snow from his back and trotted ahead to reach the porch first, waiting with an upright stance, half guarding, half guiding. Ethan carried the girl inside, careful not to jostle her injured ankle. The warmth hit them immediately, and Ranger slipped past to shake off the remaining snow near the door. Inside, Ethan set the girl gently on the couch beside the fire. Now that she was in the light, her features became clearer. She had long brown hair tangled with twigs and frost, soft round cheeks drained of color from the cold, and eyes that seemed naturally gentle despite the fear she had endured. She clutched the edge of her torn jacket as if trying to keep what little warmth she had left. Her brother knelt beside her, holding her hand, whispering comforts that revealed how close the two were. Ethan retrieved a blanket from a cedar chest, wrapping it around her shoulders. Ranger climbed onto the floor beside the couch, lying close enough that the girl could feel his warmth. When she reached out and touched his fur with her cold fingers, Ranger remained perfectly still, letting her cling to him as though he understood that his presence alone eased her fear. "Let's warm both of you up," Ethan said. He poured hot water into 2 metal cups, adding a bit of honey for warmth and energy. As he handed one cup to the boy, he noticed how the boy accepted it with both hands, as though he wasn't used to holding something warm for long. The boy drank slowly, savoring each sip. "What's your name?" Ethan asked gently. The boy hesitated, glancing at his sister before answering. "My name is Noah, and this is Emily." Emily gave a small nod, still leaning against the couch, her fingers buried in Ranger's fur. "Noah, Emily," Ethan repeated softly, committing the names to memory. The wind continued to batter the cabin walls, but inside the room felt almost peaceful, the fire crackling and Ranger's breathing steady and reassuring. Ethan examined Emily's ankle again. The swelling was minimal thanks to the quick realignment, though she still winced when she moved. "You did the right thing coming to the door," Ethan said to Noah. "You were brave." Noah lowered his gaze, embarrassed but grateful. I I just didn't know what else to do. Ranger nudged Noah's elbow with his nose, sensing the boy's lingering fear. Noah managed a tiny smile and gently touched Ranger's head. He's really kind, Noah whispered. He's a good dog, Ethan said with a rare hint of pride. He's been through a lot, too. As the temperatures outside dropped even lower, Ethan added more logs to the fire. Noah and Emily slowly regained color in their cheeks, while Ranger remained beside them like a living heater. Time passed quietly, the kind of silence filled not with tension but with a strange, newfound trust. Eventually, Emily's eyes grew heavy, and she drifted into sleep, her hand still resting on Ranger's shoulder. Noah kept watching her, but his own exhaustion was clear. "You can rest too," Ethan said. "You're safe here." Noah nodded reluctantly. "Just don't turn us away, please." Ethan paused, struck by the raw fear in the boy's voice. "You're not going anywhere tonight," he said firmly. Ranger gave a soft bark of agreement, then settled his head onto his paws. And in the warmth of that small cabin, surrounded by the storm's distant roar, a man, a shepherd dog, and 2 lost children shared their first quiet moment of safety, unaware that this night would change all of their lives forever. The storm outside pressed against the cabin walls like a living force, rattling the window panes and sending faint drafts across the wooden floor. Yet within the cabin, the fire had grown into a steady glow, filling the room with a soft warmth that contrasted sharply with the chaos beyond. Ethan placed another log onto the burning embers, then stepped back to check on the 2 children resting near the hearth. Ranger lay beside them, stretching his large body halfway between the couch and the fire, as if forming a protective barrier around Noah and Emily. His thick coat reflected the firelight in warm tones of black and gold, and his amber eyes tracked every small movement in the room. Even while resting, he remained alert, ears perked, head lifting whenever the wind struck the cabin too hard. Noah sat upright again, holding a bowl of warm stew with both hands. His thin fingers trembled slightly from exhaustion, but also from a lingering nervousness. Ethan noticed the boy's posture, the shoulders pulled inward, the guarded stare whenever someone spoke too softly. It wasn't just the cold that made him cautious. Life had taught him to prepare for disappointment. Emily, wrapped in a thick blanket, hunched over her own bowl of soup. Her cheeks were regaining color, and though her eyes were still weary, there was a gentleness to her expression. She had the fragile look of a child who learned early to endure more than she should have. Ranger nudged her leg gently with his nose, urging her to eat. She giggled quietly, a tiny sound that felt foreign in the quiet cabin. Ethan took a seat across from them at the wooden table, his posture relaxed, but his gaze attentive. His rugged face, defined by strong cheekbones and a square jaw softened by a neatly trimmed beard, reflected concern more openly now. His military discipline had carved a sense of responsibility into him. Helping others wasn't a choice, but an instinct. He cleared his throat. "You kids must have had a rough day," he said softly. "You can rest here as long as you need." Noah kept his eyes on his bowl. "We didn't mean to cause trouble," he said. "We were just trying to help a dog." Emily nodded. A little brown one. It was shivering. "And hungry," Noah added. Ethan leaned forward. "Tell me what happened." Noah's voice softened as he recalled the day. He explained how they had been wandering the edge of town looking for scraps when they spotted a small brown dog hiding beneath a dumpster. It was thin, shaking from cold, and limping slightly, as though its paw had been injured. Emily had been the first to approach it, offering a piece of stale bread she had saved. The dog backed away, frightened but desperate. When it ran toward the forest trail, the children followed, thinking they could catch it and protect it. But the deeper they went, the more the forest swallowed them. The snowfall had started earlier than expected, erasing their footprints and disorienting them until they couldn't find their way back. The dog disappeared shortly after, leaving them stranded. As Noah spoke, Ranger lifted his head, his ears twitching at the mention of another dog. He looked at Ethan with an expression that almost resembled recognition, an instinct, a sense that these children were not careless, but compassionate. Ethan understood the silent message. Ranger's life had been saved once, too. Perhaps he saw something familiar in their story. Ethan nodded. "You were trying to help. That says something important about both of you." Noah seemed surprised by the acknowledgement, as if praise was something unfamiliar. He tightened the blanket around Emily, becoming protective again. Emily, meanwhile, reached out and gently stroked Ranger's paw, whispering, "He's warm." Ranger responded by shifting closer, placing his head lightly on her lap. His breathing deepened, calm and steady. Noah hesitated at first, but Ranger nudged him too, encouraging him to settle beside his sister. For a moment the atmosphere softened, turning from fear into a fragile sense of safety. Ethan took a deep breath. "Do you have any other family?" he asked. Noah shook his head sharply. "No one left." "And nowhere to go?" The siblings exchanged glances, their silence speaking louder than words. Emily's eyes lowered, and Noah's mouth tightened in a way that made Ethan's chest ache. That was the look of a child who had learned to expect rejection. Ranger shifted again, rising to his feet. He stepped between Ethan and the children, staring at Ethan as if making a silent plea. Then he gently rested his head on Noah's arm. Noah gasped softly in surprise, then slowly smiled, his first genuine smile of the night. Ranger wagged his tail once, slow and deliberate, as though stating a fact. "They're safe here." Ethan understood the message clearly. Ranger had always had an uncanny sense for people, their intentions, their pain, their sincerity. The dog's instinct had saved Ethan more than once. Seeing Ranger choose to comfort the children made Ethan realize how desperately they needed someone. He exhaled. "You're not going anywhere tonight. This cabin is safe, and so are you." Emily leaned into Ranger. Noah pulled the blanket tighter, and for the first time, the tension in their shoulders eased. Outside, the storm continued to roar, but inside the wooden cabin, a fragile new trust settled quietly between a man, a shepherd dog, and two lost children. Unspoken, yet unmistakable, morning arrived quietly, the storm having exhausted itself sometime during the night. A pale gold light seeped through the frosted windows as Ethan stirred awake. The cabin, normally silent at dawn, now carried the soft rhythm of two children sleeping and the steady breathing of a German shepherd who had stood guard beside their door until sunrise. Ranger stretched, shook his coat, and trotted to Ethan with bright, expectant eyes, as though reminding him there was unfinished business. Ethan glanced toward the small bedroom where Noah and Emily slept, bundled beneath layers of blankets. For the first time in years, he felt something unfamiliar yet comforting, companionship in a place that had known only solitude. After breakfast, Ethan bundled the children into his old truck, intending to drive them to town, where the local social services office could provide temporary shelter. The sky had cleared, revealing endless blue stretching over the snow-covered valley. The road was slick, but manageable. Noah sat stiffly beside Emily, eyes lowered, as if preparing himself for an ending he'd experienced too many times. Emily clutched the blanket Ranger had shared with her the night before, holding it to her chest like a talisman. Ranger, however, sensed something was wrong. His ears twitched, his brows furrowed, and he paced anxiously beside the truck as Ethan prepared to leave. When Ethan climbed into the driver's seat, Ranger suddenly sprinted after the truck as it rolled forward, barking sharply in protest. Ethan slowed. Ranger ran ahead and planted himself directly in the path, refusing to move. His stance was firm, tail low but unwavering, an unmistakable block. Ethan sighed, stepped out, and Ranger immediately circled around Noah and Emily, nudging Emily's hand before sitting squarely between the two of them. His expression was different now, protective, resolute, almost pleading. Ethan understood the message. Ranger had never behaved this way unless he believed someone was truly important. Ethan crouched beside the dog, running a hand through his thick fur. "You think they should stay?" he asked softly. Ranger pressed his head against Ethan's chest in answer. Noah and Emily exchanged uncertain glances, unsure whether hope was allowed. Ethan looked at their faces, pale, tired, anxious, and knew the decision was already made. "All right," he murmured. "Just a few more days." Ranger barked once, triumphant. Back at the cabin, the next few days unfolded in gentle, unexpected ways. Ethan had always lived simply, stacking wood, fixing small repairs, cooking basic meals, reading old maps. Now, with 2 children in the house, everything felt transformed. Noah, despite his young age, insisted on helping with chores. He followed Ethan outside, the cold air reddening his cheeks as he carried small logs from the woodpile. His thin arms struggled at times, but he never complained. Ranger trotted behind him, picking up any log that slipped and placing it back into Noah's arms with surprising gentleness. Noah laughed, an honest, unguarded sound that startled even him. Emily, meanwhile, formed an instant bond with Ranger. She had always been drawn to animals, and Ranger sensed her softness. One afternoon, Ethan found her sitting on the rug beside the fire, carefully brushing Ranger's fur with a small comb Ethan hadn't used in years. Ranger lay sprawled across the floor, eyes half closed in bliss, his tail thumping lazily with every pass of the comb. Emily whispered stories to him about the stray dog she had tried to save, about the fears she could never say aloud to adults. Ranger listened as if every word mattered. When he rested his head in her lap, she giggled, a bright, ringing laugh that filled the cabin with warmth. Ethan taught Noah and Emily how to read simple words using an old textbook he found in his closet. Noah tried hard, brow furrowed in concentration, stumbling through sentences but pushing forward with determination. Emily traced the letters with her fingers, repeating softly after Ethan. Ranger stretched out beside them like a large, furry student, occasionally nudging the open book with his paw. His interruptions made the children laugh, and even Ethan couldn't help but smile. At night, Ranger refused to sleep anywhere except in the hallway outside the children's room. His body lay parallel to the door like a silent sentry, ears twitching at the faintest sound. Ethan would step quietly into the hall and watch for a moment. Ranger's loyalty had always impressed him, but this was different. This was instinct, guided by compassion, as though Ranger knew these children had lived too long without someone watching over them. Within a few days, the atmosphere in the cabin transformed entirely. What had once echoed with emptiness now pulsed with the rhythm of life. Noah's footsteps across the floorboards, Emily's soft humming as she tidied blankets, Ranger's paws pattering between them all, the clinking of dishes during meals, the children's giggles during reading lessons. Ranger's energetic sprints from room to room. It all blended into a melody the cabin hadn't heard in years. Ethan found himself stopping in the doorway more than once, simply watching. The sight of Ranger nudging Noah's elbow to correct a stack of wood, Emily braiding a bit of fur on Ranger's side while humming, or the two children curled beside the dog with books in their hands stirred something deep in him. It felt like sunlight breaking through a long winter, quiet, unexpected, and profoundly healing. The snow had finally stopped falling, leaving the world outside coated in a bright, untouched layer of white that glowed under the late afternoon sun. The forest was quiet in a way that felt almost ceremonial, as though nature itself was pausing to breathe. Inside the cabin, Ethan finished sweeping wood chips from the floor after a day of light chores. The place had changed more in a handful of days than it had in years. Blankets draped across chairs from afternoon reading, two small cups drying beside his usual coffee mug, and Ranger's large paw prints mixed with smaller ones near the back door where the children had played with him. Life had crept back into the home without Ethan fully realizing it. Noah and Emily sat together near the fireplace, their bodies small against the warm glow. Noah, despite being only 10, carried himself with a seriousness beyond his age, his narrow shoulders always slightly tense, as if preparing for the world to collapse beneath him again. Emily, her long brown hair now brushed and no longer tangled, leaned against her brother with a quiet, gentle presence. She clutched a piece of soft cloth Ranger had pulled from one of his old towels, her treasured comfort. Ranger lay stretched beside them, his head resting on his paws but his ears twitching with every sound. His amber eyes watched the children with a devotion so deep that it anchored the room with a sense of safety. As Ethan wiped the table, he sensed a shift in the air. Emily's voice, usually timid, broke the silence. We don't want to be a burden," she whispered, her words trembling like the flame in the fireplace. Noah nodded, though his gaze stayed fixed on the floor. "You've done so much already. We didn't want to make you feel stuck with us." His voice cracked, exposing a fear that was far older than he was. Ranger lifted his head immediately, responding to the tension. He rose to his feet and padded over to Emily, nudging her gently before pressing his warm body against her side. She wrapped her arms around his thick neck, burying her face into his coat. Noah wiped his eyes quickly with the back of his sleeve, trying to hide the tears, but Ranger noticed. The dog stepped between the siblings and nudged Noah's hand, as if telling him he didn't need to pretend. Noah's lip trembled. Ethan felt something in his chest tighten. Ethan crossed the room and knelt in front of them. Up close, he could see the exhaustion in their faces, the worry that had carved itself into their expressions far too early in life. Noah's dark hair hung slightly over his eyes, and Emily's small hands trembled where they clung to Ranger. Ethan rested a hand on the floor for support, his posture gentle, his expression steady. Ranger sat beside him, upright and alert, tail sweeping the floor slowly, ears angled toward Ethan as if he were waiting to hear the decision too. "You two listen to me," Ethan said, his voice low but warm. "Nobody here thinks you're a burden." Noah lifted his gaze slightly, uncertain. Emily sniffled against Ranger's fur. Ethan continued, "I don't know everything. I'm not perfect. And this place, it's quiet, far from town, maybe even a little strange." He offered a half smile. "But people like us, we find our way to each other." Noah blinked, confusion and hope tangled in his expression. Emily looked up, her brown eyes shimmering. Ranger leaned into Ethan, resting his head against Ethan's shoulder, as if anchoring the moment. Ethan reached out and placed a hand gently on Noah's arm. If you want, if you choose this place, I'll adopt you both. You can stay here, with me, with Ranger, as a family. For a moment, the children didn't react, as though the words were too heavy to understand. Then Ranger broke the stillness with a loud, joyful bark. He spun once in an excited circle, tail whipping the air, then bounded toward the children and nudged them insistently. Emily let out a soft cry that wasn't fear this time. It was relief. She threw her arms around Ethan, and Noah followed, his small frame shaking with the weight of emotions he had never been allowed to express. Ethan wrapped one strong arm around both children, holding them close. Ranger pressed into the group, leaning his warm body into their sides until the four of them became a single cluster of shared warmth. For Ethan, a man who had spent years thinking solitude was his only path, the embrace felt like stepping into sunlight after a long, bitter winter. For the children, it felt like belonging. And for Ranger, it felt like the world aligning exactly as it should. Outside, the snow glowed under the fading light, and inside the cabin, something new took root. A sense of home built not from walls or heat, but from connection. A man once alone, a loyal dog, two children who simply needed someone to choose them. And for the first time in a very long time, Ethan understood that some families aren't found by blood, but by the courage to open a door on a cold night. In the quiet corners of our lives, miracles rarely arrive with thunder or lightning. Sometimes they come as a gentle knock on a cold night, a loyal dog who refuses to give up, a child's whispered hope, or a weary heart finally brave enough to open its door. When Ethan welcomed Noah and Emily into his home, he didn't just save two children. He allowed God's grace to fill the empty spaces of his own life. Sometimes, the greatest miracles are not the ones we ask for, but the ones God sends when we least expect them, reminding us that family is not always blood. Sometimes it is love, choice, and divine timing. As you watch this story, may you be reminded that kindness still has the power to change lives. And may the Lord bless you with the courage to open your heart to the unexpected miracles He places in your path. Whether it's a stranger in need, a moment of compassion, or simply the chance to do good when no one else is watching. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment. Tell us where you're watching from and what part moved you most. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our next story of faith, kindness, and healing. May God's love surround you. May His peace guide you. And may His blessings follow you and your family, today and always. God bless every viewer watching this video.